And for more on that, let's cross now live to Denver and bring in Zhao. He's the executive director of the Center for China-U.S. Cooperation at the University of Denver. Sam, thanks for joining us. 40 years on, the U.S. and China have very different leaders, obviously, than they did back in 1978. What do you make of their differences and how they affect the relationship now?
At that time, the leaders are eager to establish diplomatic relations and try to understand each other and eventually trying to find common ground to work with each other. And there are many factors that put these two countries together. One was the strategic or geostrategic interest of fighting against the Soviet Union. So these two countries at that time were brought together for what they were against, not quite by what they were for. So that has left problems for today's leaders in these two countries. They have found out after the end of Cold War, after the disappearance of the former Soviet Union. So these countries have not found shared values, and also interests has not been, economic interests have not come together. For quite a while, the U.S. had some kind of you can say illusion or some kind of wishful thinking to change China to the Americans' image or like. So after the 40 years or 30 years of engagement, this has not quite come to the fruit. So there are a lot of criticisms of the relationship, or especially American engagement for China. And the current leaders, Trump, basically said the engagement was a total failure. China has taken advantage of American open society and a free economy to advance its own interests at America's expenses. So in that case, the current leaders have tried to fundamentally change the relationship, try to, what in their mind, to have a fair relationship, or the fair playing field. So that's how what we see the current leaders launch the trade war, and there are some also geostrategic rivalries between these two countries. So the relationship has found a big change in the last few years.
Sam, since these three communiques, so the Soviet Union is no more, but what would you say have been the major accomplishments between China and the U.S. over the last 40 years?
I think the most important thing is China has developed from isolated country, angry country, and the former Soviet Union communist camp, to a rising power, and also much more open, and in fact a very important part of international community. The Chinese people have been lifted out of poverty and have the best living standard in Chinese history. And the U.S. also benefited from this relationship. During the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. was in the economic stagnation, and they opened the market to Chinese products which were no cost. So that sustained U.S. economic growth and prosperity. Since then, those low-cost Chinese products in the U.S. has become such an important part of American life. So American prosperity also came from this relationship, and also regional prosperity and security stability. In fact, after the end of Cold War, which also coincided with the normalization of the relationship between China and the U.S., we have not seen a major war in this area.
Indeed.
So the engagement.
Indeed, Sam Zhao. I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. Sam Zhao, from the executive director from the Center for China-U.S. Cooperation. Thank you for joining us.